As far as the history of Kashmir is concerned, we had cultural contacts since from the ancient times with the outside world. For example, when we talk about the Burzum, it is believed that the existence of life in Kashmir has been started from there. We had cultural contacts with the outside world in the form of, for example, Sarai Nar Khola is a particular site in Pakistan. Even many sites are there at Mongolia, China and Pakistan. We find different types of beads, agate, potteries from Burzum. Simultaneously, same potteries we find at northern Pakistan, Taxila. So we had a cultural contact since from the ancient times with the outside world. As far as the Baramulla district is concerned, it is considered as the western gateway of Kashmir. You know, travelers, invaders, money invaders, travelers come from this particular route. It was since from the ancient times used as court road. Now the question is, what is the history and historical background of the Fatehgarh temple? For this, I would say that the temple is more important in many aspects historically and archaeologically, because this whole valley, that is the Narvaw valley, it was used to a great extent since from the 3rd century BC as a very good Buddhist settlement. Because the Fatehgarh temple, around this Fatehgarh temple, we had a great fertile site. One should say the name of this particular village is now Baramulla. We have remains of the Buddhist remains there, so it clearly indicates that this had some sort of cultural association with Buddhism. And around this site we have another stupas at Zahanpura. They had great cultural legacy as far as the Buddhism is concerned, because one of the stupa is same in size, in a manner, in a decent attitude like stupa of Sanchi. So the whole history of this very particular temple is very important to know for all of us. It was actually in 1823 when Trebeck and William Moore Croft notes this very particular temple, and William Moore Croft wrote a book, very good book, Travels in the Provinces of Hindustan and Punjab, in which he wrote down about this, but in a very brief manner. Then after, it was Alexander Cunningham who visited this very particular site in 1848. He quoted Trebeck and Hugel. He also wrote a great book, Essays on the Aeronaut of Architecture. Alexander Cunningham is known as the father of Indian archaeology. He was, very curious minded to know all about the temples of Kashmir. When he visited this particular place, and he claimed that I tried to find the name of this very particular temple, but the ignorant Mohammedans couldn't give me a concrete information about this, and they totally called this particular temple as Batdal, means the idol house. So the ignorant Mohammedans, he called them ignorant Mohammedans. It means that he claimed that it were the Muslims who did not give me a particular knowledge of this very particular temple. Although he acquired great knowledge from the Mohammedans, Muslims from there, because in the form of oral tradition, it was quite prevalent in those days. He's talking about the 18th century onwards. It was the Muslims who gave him a very outstanding knowledge of this very particular temple, but he still claims that ignorant Mohammedans. He used this word in his book Essays on the Aeronaut of Architecture. So then after, he quote Viges and Hugel. Covey was one of the great archaeologists. He wrote another book, Notes on the Temples of Kashmir, in which he compared this very particular Fatehgarh temple with the Boniar temple, because the pediments we find, the material we find, the images, different types of images we find there, even material was used, same was used in the Boniar temple. But in the description of Alexander Cunningham, he compared this particular temple with a Pandratan, that is now in Srinagar, because some of the ruins he finds that was alike with the Pandratan temple. So there is a debate among the scholars whether it was alike with the Bunya temple and Monumental temple. So I must say that all the temples of Kashmir had some sort of links with each other in the form of structure, material. Four types of materials has been used in these very particular temples, so all that material we had with us that was available locally at that time. Different carpenters has used a different craftsmanship has been used. They somewhere living in Kashmir and they borrowed some from Central Asia, all that. Then after, when we talk about this particular temple whole in a very broad manner, so this whole, and it was Hyun Seng who visited the Kashmir in this very gateway. It is believed he spent some of his nights at Ushkura. But one should say the history of this whole temple, and there's a village namely Hewan. Modern we people call it Hewan, but ancient name of this very particular place is Hyun. So one of the famous archaeologists, namely S.L. Shawley, he wrote in his book Kashmir and Archaeology Through the Ages. Simultaneously, another great historian and archaeologist, R.C. Agarwal, he wrote a book that Kashmir and its monumental glory, in which he signifies and he gave us some sort of glimpses about this very particular village. He claimed that this village is quite relevant with the name of Hyun Seng. He named this very village as Hyun. So in those days, the only village that has existed in this very whole valley, that was Hewan. So one should say that the name has been derived from the name of Hyun Seng. So Hyun Seng wrote about the great history of this particular valley, that is the Kashmir valley, and he collected some scriptures of Buddhism. He was in search of Buddhist literature because he was a great Buddhist. He wrote also a great book, Siyuki, the records of the Western world. He spent almost 2 years in Kashmir. So he wrote the whole history of this Kashmir in a very detailed manner. But the archaeologists, S.L. Shawley, R.C. Agarwal, Alexander Kanangam, all other scholars give us information about this particular place, that is Hewan, that is quite near about this Fatehgarh temple. So the ancient name of this very valley was Hyun. It is because we find these texts, the name of this very particular place, and it was Hyun existing in the ancient literature. The name of this whole valley was Hyun. So the question, that is the Buddhist, it was actually Buddhist temple. It is historicity and archaeology and antiquity, one should say, it is not a quite recent, but it belongs to the 3rd century BC. But it was later on, it was used as a trading hub in those days, because the whole vicinity was around this Buddhist settlements we find from Baramulla, even Zain. We had different types of literature and different types of inscriptions find that gives us clear image of this very particular temple. As far as the Archaeological Survey of India, it was actually, I think in 1978, that the Archaeological Survey of India excavate this particular site, and they find different images there. Maheshwari image was found there, Trimurti image. That is a new art and sculptural art in Kashmir temples. So this discovery, that the image found of Trimurti, is very outstanding image. That's quite different from the other temples of Kashmir. So on that basis, one should say that this temple is quite important, and its architecture is very outstanding architecture and overwhelming too. Since from the ancient times, its history is very long. So I would say in a simpler manner that this temple was used as a great learning purpose temple, Buddhist temple. Then after, it was the period of, I think it is believed that Lalta Dadya made this temple also because he was a great conqueror and he collected huge booty and images from the outside conquests and laid his foundation at Fatehgarh, and building many buildings he built here. For example, when we talk about the Bonia temple, the credit of this temple goes to Lalta Dadya also. Simultaneously, we find some mentions of this very temple goes back to the 7th century AD. The credit of this temple goes to the Lalta Dadya also. So the history of this Fatehgarh temple is not a recent history. It is very, 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 very ancient. It lies to the southwest of Baramulla, because this route has been since from the ancient times used as a cart road. Different traders had come from Central Asia in Kashmir, so they spent some of nights at this very particular temple. This whole history of this village is very important, and one thing is important here, that it was Kuvi. who 1972 he visited Kashmir, and I told you earlier that he wrote a great book, Notes on the some temples of Kashmir, in which he mentioned that he called this very particular temple as Batdal. Batdal. Batdal means the land of the Buddhas, the land of the Buddhas. So it is clearly indicates that this settlement temple is quite associated with the Buddhism. And around this we have, in a simple manner, when we say about this particular temple, we find the Buddhist remnants, Buddhist ruins at Baramulla, near of this very particular temple, and near of Zainpura and Gantmula, we have there also evidence of Buddhism. So this whole, and same Ushkora is not far from this very temple, far from this very valley, that is Narvaw Valley. So this whole district, one should say Baramulla, even whole Kashmir, was known because of Buddhism. It is believed that the Buddhism spread from Kashmir to other parts of the world, Mongolia, China, Tibet, all that. It was actually the king Ashok Maurya who introduced the Buddhism in Kashmir. So then after it was Kanishka, the Kushana king, who gave patronage of the different religions of Kashmir, whether in the form of Buddhism, Jainism, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, all that. So he was a staunch follower of Buddhism. He led fourth Buddhist council at Kandalwan. It is believed one should associate this particular site in the Kushana period, because same material we find at Baramulla, that is not in preserved site, but in the ahead of this very particular surface of the land, we find some remnants that goes back to the A180 around. So this whole land is much concerned with the Buddhism. It was Kanishka king that we consider this particular site, we attach this particular site with the Kushana period, in the early historic period, because Kanishpura is not far from this very particular place, that is Fatehgarh, Narvaw Valley, and Ushkora is not far from this particular village. Both these sites are quite associated with Buddhism, and they belong to the 1st century AD around, and we traced the history from these temples from the Kushana period. So it is clear from this point of view, one should say that this particular site, that is Baramulla and even Zainpura, all goes to the, or belongs to this particular era, that is the 1st century AD.